Okay, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm Stacy Gorkoff, and I'm presenting a webinar today called Why Transaction Monitoring, Why Now? Now, this is a webinar that is being co-presented by NCR and INETCO. And for those of you that are wondering why it is that INETCO is presenting this webinar today, we've been a very close global partner of NCR's for the past 4 years. Our flagship transaction monitoring technology, INETCO Insights, plays a very, very important, a very complementary role to NCR's other enterprise awareness products such as AptraVision and OptiCash. INETCO Insight is definitely something that you'll know a lot more about after today's presentation. So I think you've already figured it out, but I am one of the presenters today, along with INETCO's VP of Marketing, Mark Borbas. Mark, you may want to say hi.
Yeah, great. Hi, everyone.
Great. Okay. Now, because INETCO is headquartered in Vancouver, Canada, I thought it would be fun to draw on some inspiration from the beautiful coastal mountains that actually surround us. So jumping in, here is a high-level glance of what we're talking about today. First, we'll address the two-part question that got us here in the first place. We'll discuss why it is that real-time transaction monitoring is becoming such an important consideration for financial institutions today. And then we can take a look at what's really changed in retail banking environments, and for that matter, the technology landscape that has made now such a perfect time for us to invest in this type of technology. Then we can move on to a live demonstration of what real-time transaction monitoring software looks like, and end with what is always what I would call my favorite part of the presentation, the question and answer period. If at any moment you do have any questions for Mark or myself, please feel free to utilize the chat feature in BrightTalk. We'll do our best to answer all of your questions at the end of this presentation. Now, where I'd like to start us off today is with a very simple question, but it is one that you may hear from your customers a little too often, and that is, where is my transaction? In most banking instances, this question requires a fairly urgent answer, as a dropped transaction can mean more than just a loss of money. It can also equate to the loss of the future business of a customer. Now, unfortunately, the easiest questions are sometimes the toughest ones to answer. What we're often seeing with many financial service providers right now is what we'll term a high-pressure systems warning. So by that, we mean that people are faced with a number of different complexities that we never really had to consider before. So we see greater infrastructure complexity and new application architectures. So really what that is all about is we're talking about a rise in the number of virtual banking channels and the various types of self-service access points. We're seeing more and more multi-vendor devices being deployed. We see more service platforms, more fraud and security applications, and EFT network channels. Now, all of this stuff is becoming very tough to manage, especially when you add into that the connections to third-party bill payment processors, remittance services, and perhaps other web-based services where real-time performance visibility is often extremely limited. Now, that's just various infrastructure complexities that we have to deal with today. And then you take a look at the different types of electronic transactions, the types of digital services. There are, for instance, more and more cases where the start and end points of transactions are different. A transaction may start at an ATM, but end at a mobile phone. Essentially, what we're seeing are more and more places where transactions can fail. Now, on top of all of this, we have rising consumer expectations. So regardless of whether or not you're dealing with a high-value transaction or a low-value transaction, it could be anything from checking a banking balance to depositing a 6- or 7-figure check. Customers are expecting that you complete both in a timely manner. So all of these different factors, all of these things are making the task of managing these multi-channel banking systems and maintaining consistent service levels this is becoming an increasingly difficult thing to do. So if you really think about it, your ability to fix problems faster, perhaps increase transaction-based revenue opportunities, and deliver a truly amazing omnichannel customer experience, this all starts behind the scenes. And this is why it's really important and why we need to figure out if your multi-channel banking environment is truly stable, unstable, or somewhere in between. So now that we understand some of the things that we're actually facing out there, the things that are making it more and more difficult for us to actually monitor and ensure that transactions are completed the way that our customers expect them to, we can move through and discuss, that overview of, okay, if we have a customer transaction that's moving through multiple network links, servers, and applications, this journey to completion is definitely a little more difficult than it used to be. Whether you are at risk of these critical transactions actually failing or slowing down, this will totally depend on your channel operations and your support teams' knowledge, their preparedness, and most importantly, their ability to achieve this operations-wide visibility. So what we mean by that, if you really want to know what the customer is experiencing and what you can do to improve transaction performance, then you need to see holistically into the whole end-to-end transaction journey, not just the individual devices, the individual applications, or network components. This means that at any point, these teams should be able to answer questions such as, how are all my self-service devices and all my banking applications performing? Are there perhaps a bottleneck or a communication failure happening on any of my network paths? And are host authorization systems responding the way customers expect them to, for example, in a timely manner? And this is why, in a nutshell, why financial institutions are turning to real-time transaction monitoring software. So why real-time transaction monitoring? If you really stop and think about it, your banking network is playing host to an always-on data source, consumer transactions. If you are concerned about fixing performance issues faster, increasing transaction-based revenue opportunities, and again, delivering that amazing omni-channel customer experience, then transaction data becomes your gold mine. End-to-end transaction monitoring solutions also overcome many of the data collection and some of the ownership challenges that are commonly caused by infrastructure complexity and growing transaction volumes. Some of the key problems resolved would include things such as fragmented data. Now you don't have to worry about trying to access and piece together data that is owned by multiple teams. Or correlation issues. So with an automated end-to-end transaction correlation capability, the visibility into multi-protocol environments becomes a lot easier. Or what about the cost and the resource constraints that a lot of us are facing? You can significantly reduce operational costs by isolating the root cause of issues, and this is a proven fact, on average 65 to 75% faster. And then there's this whole idea of moving from reactive to proactive. With a more proactive approach to performance isolation, you can actually find and resolve issues before your customers complain. So now that we understand why we should monitor transactions, we can take a look at what's changed to make this a viable option now. So really, technology innovation has helped make the retooling around this whole idea of consumer experience and delivering the best customer experience possible. This has become a lot easier for financial institutions. As we'll soon see in our demonstration of INETCO Insights, today's network-based transaction monitoring software is specifically designed so that each transaction that travels across your multi-channel environments, be it an ATM, point of sale, mobile, or perhaps an internet banking transaction, each of these is captured in real time, and they're all stored in one centralized place for all teams to access. Each transaction record contains not only operations data, but business data as well. So all of a sudden you understand what the consumer is experiencing, how networks and applications are responding, and what the business value of each transaction really is from a revenue or perhaps a service perspective. And rather than spending time and money diving into a whole host of network, application, device management, perhaps some server tools, all of these tools that are usually quite independent of each other, you can now start looking at a more centralized end-to-end operations view. So the nice thing about today's technologies as well, and again, I'm going to hand it over to Mark right now to talk about this, is that we can also do all this without having to deploy expensive agents, without having to add extra traffic loads, or to have to make any major application or payment switch changes within your environment itself. And at this point, let's hand it over to Mark, and you can take us through a demo of the INETCO Insight monitoring software.
Sounds good. Thanks, Stacy. Okay, so we're just going to have a little switch over here as we switch over to show the INETCO Insight screens. Good, and let me just bring this up full screen. Okay, so as Stacy mentioned, INETCO Insight gives us real-time visibility into what's happening in our payments environment, our ATM environment, even into just about any channel you can imagine from a banking perspective. The system is designed really to fuel the need of an operations team to quickly spot issues as they're unfolding, spot customer experience issues, spot network failure issues, spot issues that could be causing regulatory compliance problems, or even just technical performance problems, and then being able to isolate those problems really quickly. So across the top, you're seeing a live real-time view of the application environment. And so here we've got a couple of examples. We've got on the left-hand side a multi-tier web application, something similar to what you'd see in your online or mobile banking environment. In the middle, we've got a more traditional ATM and point-of-sale style application with a core switch and an external authorization host. And then off to the side, we've got some branch traffic for a lending application and just a few other bits of sample traffic. And what you'll notice is the thickness of the line here tells me how much traffic is moving. You'll see red spots appear if there's failures, and if you see a dashed line, it means that there are no transactions flowing across that link right now. So even at a high level, just having this up on the screen gives you that sort of peace of mind view as to the health of your overall system, but also shows you all the moving parts of that system and how they're wired together. Now, we certainly don't expect you to watch this screen all the time, and this is why there's these alerts down below here. These can be forwarded on to your enterprise management system of choice, be that AppTravision or any other console that you use for service desk and alarming. These alerts can be brought in there. You can act on them in there, and then they will link back to the INETCO Insight system for what I'm about to show you. Because typically what you're doing is you're looking for customer experience issues, transaction failures, slowdowns, etc. And so basically you use our engine to set up those rules that define normal or abnormal performance or the kinds of anomalies that you want to spot. And then you sit back and you let us detect those. But we will spot them as of the first transaction, the first event. So rather than waiting for a customer to, or perhaps the 100th customer to finally get upset enough that they call into the help desk and waiting for that help desk to create a ticket, subsequently route that to you, you could be talking about hours or even days when an issue is occurring. With Insight, you're spotting that right away, so you instantly compress the time it takes from an issue occurring to you actually being aware of the issue and able to do something about it and understand its impact and prioritize it. So here we'll pick on this unexpected decline. Now, in a financial system, you often see declines. So the customer puts in the wrong PIN, they ask for more money than they have in their account or than they're authorized to receive from their account. But declines can also mask failures in the system because of the way these systems recover. And so here we've got one particular transaction that has caused this unexpected decline. I'm going to open this up, and what you're going to see is a step-by-step view of the transaction. This started at an ATM. There's the PIN authorization request. There's the financial authorization request. The request goes out to the final authorization host, so you can see it's going across multiple steps here along the bottom, or different hops in your environment and into third-party environments. And you notice there's no response coming back here. Now, the first question is, are we dealing with a network problem or are we dealing with an application problem? Well, fortunately, Insight can help us figure that out. We can see the underlying network traffic that supports this transaction flow. And we can see that, yes, indeed, the network is working. So our problem is we didn't receive a response from this authorization host. And when we look at it, it looks like we actually waited 60 seconds to get that response. When we didn't, this core switch tried to make the decision, can I stand in or not? We can see the customer was asking for $420, which was clearly over our stand-in limit. So unfortunately, our only option was to decline the customer's transaction, which is not a great customer experience. They probably had more than enough money available to execute the transaction. But unfortunately, because of a technical failure in the system, we disappointed the customer. We weren't able to fulfill their transaction. And as we're going along, the reason we can do this and tie all this together is we're capturing a phenomenal amount of detail, rich detail about every transaction. So there's our transaction dollar amount, for instance. There's the card acceptor's location. You can see the customer's PAN number masked for security reasons. NINETCO Insight's deployed in close to 50 environments now, all of which are subject to PCI audits. We have a security model that handles all of the sensitive cardholder data and either eliminates it, truncates it, encrypts it, whatever is required according to PCI to make sure that you're fully in bounds when using the system. Now, the other reason I'm showing you this detail is this is a gold mine for anyone on the application or the network side who's actually trying to resolve this problem. Because not only can they see what's going on, but they can see the conditions under which it's occurring, and they've got all this detail about the message. So they're going to be able to isolate this problem far faster. When that authorization host team starts looking at this, they know exactly what transaction they're looking for. They've got a trace audit number. They can look it up in their logs and look it up in their system, and they can figure out what went wrong within the authorization host to cause this particular problem. So you're really helping them isolate it as well. So if you think about it, you've got the time between the problem occurring and between you becoming aware of it, and we compress that from what could be hours or days to minutes or seconds. And then the time to actually isolate the problem and get the right team. The second piece is the time to get the right team working on the problem. As you know, often we do a lot of finger pointing and trying to figure out what's going on. That can take hours. With Insight, that's minutes or seconds. And then the time to actually isolate the problem and figure out the conditions under which it's occurring for the specialist team that's working on it is another spot that it could take them a long time to find the right transaction. But because we're following individual transactions, we give you that instant key to look it up and figure out exactly what's happening. So that's just kind of a view into the standard use case. Once you're in here as well, you can, let me just close this window down. Lots of flexibility on dashboards. So for instance, if you want to create more of a visual dashboard that shows your transaction rate and your failures, your response times, you can create all of these. They are completely editable. You can change them to show whatever you want, create your own dashboards. And also, every bit of information you see in Insight is actionable. If you want to see what's going on with that peak, you can show the transactions that are causing it, or you can look at a trended view, say, okay, I want to put this in context and understand whether that spike is just a little anomaly or whether this has been happening for a long time. So here we'll pull up a view of the data over the last, let's say, 30 minutes. So here's a graph of my response time over the last 30 minutes. And as you can see, my system has a pretty consistent pattern of pretty fast response times followed by sudden spikes, followed by normal response times. In other words, this is great demonstration traffic designed to show you peaks and valleys. I'll have a little bit different view of it. And if I want to add more data to this, I want to graph something else perhaps. Let's see. My bad transaction rate alongside this, or I want to see what my network delay is. Let's add that. Oops, sorry. Now I can look at network delay and how that might affect response time as well. So response time on the top, network delay on the bottom. You can see that there's a fair bit of network delay right around the same time that I'm having those response time issues. So that's a good indicator that that's likely my root cause. I can drill into the transactions that are causing that to happen and investigate those from here as well. And the final thing I'll show before we slide on here is sometimes it's valuable to look at this in a real-time performance view or look at the trends, but often you're kind of interested in the performance of individual entities or objects or components in the network as well. For instance, you might want to be able to see what's going on with particular host links or particular terminals or card bases. So similarly, a NETCO Insight allows you to pick up any terminal in your environment and see what its traffic profile has looked like. Terminal 28 here has had 14 approved transactions in the last 10 minutes, pardon me. And we can go back in time and see what any of these devices was doing last Friday, for instance. See what the pattern looks like. It's going to be very similar because we're looking at demo data here. Let's say maybe I want to look more at terminal failures, though. So here I can look at failed transactions, slow transactions by terminal, and I can see very quickly which of my terminals is the slowest or fastest on the network. Going to be at the bottom here. Here we go. So there are my top 10 offending terminals in the last 10 minutes, and I can zoom back and forth and see which pieces I want to spend the most time on. Again, like everything else, I can drill into these and I can see the transactions or a history of what's been happening at this particular object. There we go. Not a particularly interesting graph. The same thing happens over and over again at these terminals, as you can see. But in a real-world environment, this is going to look a lot more interesting. Okay, so that's a quick walk through Insight. And what I'll do is switch back to the slide presentation and just recap a little bit of what we've seen here. Okay, so let's talk very quickly about how Insight works. How did we capture all that wonderful data that you saw? Well, first of all, we capture every transaction, as you saw. We do it in real time, and we do it without agents. So there are no agents on the ATM. There's no agents on your transaction switch. You don't have to create a data feed off of your host to provide data to us. You don't have to make any code changes to your application to tag and trace these transactions. We're capturing it off of the network using span or tap ports typically, getting a copy of that network traffic, the raw network traffic, applying our security model to it so we make sure that nothing ever gets stored or displayed that shouldn't, and then we're doing all the decoding and reassembly of the transaction to provide the views that you see. So huge amount of work happening in real time, but from your perspective it means a very lightweight deployment. You're not having to make massive application changes to put us in place. You're just making a couple of network configuration changes. You saw how we can instantly alert when something breaks or something slows down in a large-scale transaction system. Not only that, though, we can tie that alert to the individual transaction. So you can go back and see exactly what caused that event to fire, spot the individual transactions, and isolate it very quickly. I didn't show you the searching in Insight, but you can very quickly search, just like I looked back in time in the terminal view. You can go back in time in a transaction view as well and find that offending transaction that happened last Thursday. So we keep a week's worth of transaction data online in all its full detail, and you can go back and search for issues that may have occurred in the past. So you can use Insight like a time machine. And you saw that we're not only storing all the network and application and metadata that we find, but we're organizing it. We're providing a structure to it. There's a transaction model there that allows you to move step by step and hop by hop through a transaction. And we find the advantage of that is if you just do a screen dump of a transaction, the only person that's really going to understand it is someone who understands the switch and perhaps is even a programmer. With Insight, we've tried to structure the model so that an IT operations person can understand how a transaction is moving, what it's doing, and learn to look for specific data fields. So you're really getting this end-to-end view for your operations team. Not only is it an end-to-end or an enterprise-wide view, but it runs across channels. So you can look at your ATM channel, as I gave you examples of today, across your mobile, your internet, and other self-service devices as well. So Whether you're rolling out interactive tellers or interactive bankers, maybe you have kiosks already running in your branches, Insight can be used across all those different channels to mine this transaction data and to ensure you're delivering a consistent customer experience across all the channels. And the nice part is that by doing this with one product, you get easy access to that transaction data. You're not having to think about, okay, now I'm thinking about the mobile channel, where do I get that data from? Where do I get it from in the online channel? You solve the problem once with Insight, you get the transaction data for everything. So it's that one-stop real-time view into your application, your network, and your host performance, regardless of which channel you want to look at. And that ends up giving us a 65 to 75% faster mean time to repair. Gives our customers a 65 to 75% faster mean time to repair, which makes a big difference in terms of the efficiency of their operation and the satisfaction of their customers. And finally, just to highlight on business impacts, we've talked a lot about the technology. Let's talk about how it's going to help you as a business. We've seen customers reduce their failed transaction rates by up to 26% in their first year of using NINETCO Insight. If you're thinking about this from an ATM perspective, that translates into an improvement in availability that can mean up to $250 in additional revenue per ATM per year. So there's a significant business case just in reducing failed transactions and in recapturing lost revenue. And if you think about this across different channels as well, the number is going to go up, but this is just an example on the ATM side. That faster mean time to repair is something that all of our customers find. The average mean time to repair for a transaction issue is about 120 minutes, so 2 hours. That's fast by most company standards, actually. We can bring that down to 30 minutes or less, so that's significant. But the other number that we're not measuring here is that mean time to actually discover the problem. So that time between the first time it happens, the time that a customer calls in, the time that the help desk finally routes it to you, that can be a few hours in the process as well, and we make that discovery instant. So you're getting easy, real-time access to all your customer transaction data. And as I mentioned before, there's a real value in being able to solve this problem once across all your channels, so that you're leveraging your investment. Even if you start on the ATM side, you can leverage that investment across point of sale, mobile, branch, and internet banking as well. And once you've trained your team once, they already know how to use Insight and they can keep going across channels. And at this, I'll hand back over to Stacey to wrap us up.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, this is meant to be a quick summary slide. So really what we want to do is summarize what we talked about today here. And the main point is, if you are focused on looking for ways that you can fix problems faster, increase those transaction-based revenue opportunities, and again, deliver an amazing omnichannel customer experience, it is definitely time that you consider investing in a real-time transaction monitoring software solution. And with that, we are going to open it up to questions. We do want to hear from you. And please keep them coming in. I already see a few that have come in. And let's just see here. All right. So one of the questions, how does INETCO Insight work with Actravision? As we started off, we talked about this idea of NCR's enterprise awareness, their suite of products. Within those products, they include the INETCO Insight real-time transaction management software. They include the Actravision device management software, and they include OptiCash, the cash management software. So there are a few different software components to this mix. If you think about INETCO Insight and the transaction data that we can provide, and think about combining that with your device management software, device management information. Right now, you have the ability to forward these transaction alerts up into Actravision so that you can actually see in one spot your deep dive into how your devices, all your ATM devices, et cetera, are performing. And then you can also see the back end of what happens to a transaction once it leaves the device itself. So that's a pretty powerful view. That's a really, really good question. Okay. The next question that came in, and this is one that I think I can let Mark answer. How does INETCO Insight handle encrypted data?
Sure. So very carefully is the short answer, but encrypted data is something we're seeing more often in both ATM and point-of-sale environments. Variety of different ways to handle it. It really depends on your security architecture. We can decrypt the data on the fly by putting security keys on the Insight system, and that can map to your hardware security module, or we can store the keys in a secure fashion as well. Or we do have the ability to put a collecting component on either your transaction switch or your ATM if that's a preferred option. It's a very low overhead component that can give us access to the transaction data prior to encryption. Regardless of which approach you choose, the security model in Insight ensures that even though we are seeing that data in the clear, we're dropping all the sensitive information, we're encrypting ourselves when we're storing information, we're truncating PAN numbers, so you're not going to put yourself afoul of PCI by doing this.
Okay. The next question. If I have already deployed a switch monitoring solution, do I need transaction monitoring?
Yes. I mean, switch monitoring solutions are great. They give you a really detailed view into what's happening in the switch. But when you think about the way most of our banking environments are going, the switch is only one component of a much larger system. Increasingly, we're seeing new application platforms deployed between the ATM and the switch to provide advanced services like preferences, setting, even value-added services, other components. So after connections from NCR is a great example of kind of a middle component that fits in between the transaction switch and the ATM itself. So in that case, the switch monitoring solution gives you a very isolated or a view of one single component, but it doesn't really tell you about what's going into and out of that component and traveling across the rest of the environment. So we see lots of cases, for instance, where transactions never make it to the transaction switch, and so the switch monitoring solution isn't going to help you.
Great. This next question is an interesting one as well. How does INETCO Insight work in an active-active postilion environment?
Yeah, we're starting to see more of these deployments around the world now for redundancy and reliability. Insight is really useful in an active-active environment because we can essentially monitor both transaction streams and bring them together into a single stream. So when you think about your switch monitoring product, you're going to have an independent view of each switch, which is great if you're trying to diagnose problems on one switch. But when you're expecting the switches to work in a mirrored fashion, how do you actually analyze that?
Great. Can you use INETCO Insight to monitor other devices such as POS or mobile banking? And the answer to that is yes. INETCO Insight can be deployed within the ATM environment, but it can also be used within all your other channels, so point of sale, mobile, internet banking, anywhere where we're seeing customers interact with any of your actual touch points that are out there in the field today. Those transactions can be brought in and we can monitor those. And they don't have to be a payment transaction. They could be a service transaction. So it could be somewhere or something where perhaps it's somebody even checking, as we mentioned earlier, somebody is simply checking their banking balance on their phone. We capture all those transactions and we ensure that each one is working and the request and the response times are as your consumers would expect them to be.
Okay, we've got one here. When there is a failed transaction, does the solution have the capacity to detect the specific point of failure, e.g. link, power, switch, or core banking application? Really good question. So if there's a failed transaction, what we're trying to do is help you localize the problem, figure out which component in the environment is failing. So whether that could be pointing towards a network service provider, pointing towards a specific IP address pair, even to that level that's not working, pointing to a specific host or route into a host. We're not going to get down to the level of telling you which networking device along the path is failing or which component within your application is failing. We're going to rely on your deep dive tools in those components, but our job is to figure out and localize the problem within your environment or help you isolate it, and we think that's really where the time savings comes into play.
Okay. Here's one. Can you create reports in INETCO Insight?
You can create, as you saw me creating real-time dashboards, so I can obviously create as many of those as I want in different views. I can also create those trends graphs I showed you, so I can get a kind of an ad hoc reporting of performance trends over the last 8 days or so across a bunch of different dimensions. And then the data from INETCO Insight can be streamed out a variety of different ways, including into the AptraVision product, where there's a full reporting package in there that you can use to get at the transaction data. You can send it off into SQL databases and other avenues as well.
Great. If I am running Gasper, can alerts be forwarded into this system as well?
Yes, they can. So if you're using Gasper, you can definitely forward alerts into Gasper or into AptraVision. Both work. We have customers doing both.
Great. And then, can you monitor an ATM fleet made up of multiple vendors such as NCR and Diebold?
Yeah, so basically, I mean, each major ATM out there has its own set of protocols that it uses. Those often differ by country, by manufacturer, et cetera, but we have the ability to handle all of those, and we can give you a normalized view of your transactions regardless of which ATM manufacturer they originate from. Another one that's come in here states, how much does it cost, and is it possible to do a business impact model to prove a business case? How many devices should be ideal for the tool in terms of scale?
Okay, well the answer to that is yes, it's possible to do a business impact business case for sure. And if you want to, we can take that conversation offline, as we do have some models that we can work with you, and we can plug your numbers in there so you can see just what type of operational efficiencies, as well as what type of actual revenue gains you can get with a technology such as INETCO Insight. In terms of ideal for scale, we have worked with banks, and in fact, we just deployed in the case of one of our credit unions here in Canada. They had one machine, but they had one regulatory issue that they wanted to solve, and it had to do with the ability to track transactions in real time. So they have deployed our technology. We've worked with banks that have less than 100 ATMs, and we've worked with banks, and actually, I think about Moneris, who has over 350,000 point-of-sale terminals. You know, we have done the whole scale, so it's definitely something that we can consider for you, and we can definitely plug your numbers into our business impact models. But yeah, 1 to 350,000 works. Okay. Oh, how does data get collected by INETCO Insight?
You know, I'm glad this question was asked, because this is a good point to just really clarify on. Often when I'm doing customer presentations, this question gets asked 3 or 4 times because there's sort of a disbelief that you can really get all this data off the network. But the truth is you can. So just to recap, we are capturing a copy of the network traffic using a span or a tap port on an Ethernet switch. We're often capturing it at multiple points and from multiple span and tap ports, and that's fine. That's a real simple configuration change for your network engineers to make. They probably can do it in their sleep. And then we capture that network traffic, and we do all the analysis on top of that. So I did mention, and maybe I confused the matter a little bit, that we do have a little collector agent that we can deploy in certain scenarios where perhaps you don't have access to the data center traffic. It's hard to get at the network traffic. We can find other ways to plug in and capture it. But I'd say 90% of our deployments today use pure network traffic off of a span or a tap port.
Great. Now, it looks like our questions are slowing down a little bit. We can keep the line open for another minute or so. This presentation is being recorded, so you will be able to get a link to the recorded version of this as well. It looks like no more questions from the audience. Okay, well, I think we can wrap it up at this point. What we'd like to do is just say a big thank you to every one of you. We know your schedules are busy, and thanks for taking the time out. Oh, I think one more question. This
one just looks like we're having a technical issue. So Yes, we are definitely recording the presentation, and we will make sure we get a good, clean recording out to you.
Okay, great. Anyways, thanks to all of you for joining us today, and we hope you have a really great day, and we hope that you found this presentation extremely useful. And we look forward to any other questions that you may have. You can see both mine and Mark's contact information on the screen here, so feel free to email us with any other questions that you may have. And with that, we'll wrap it up and have a great day.